All right, my clock says 11:31, so I'll go ahead and start. My name is Lawrence Miller. I live here in the Philadelphia area, and I'm a team lead at the American College of Physicians, which is located about 10 blocks from here. So that you have time to escape and go to a different talk, let's figure out exactly what we're going to talk about. This session is aimed at people who are not already experts in deployment engineering or super up to everything latest Drupal experts as a whole. If you're new to Drupal, if it's not your primary task, or you find yourself maintaining older Drupal sites that somebody else created, there will probably be here something useful for you in here. We're going to some of the topics that we'll talk about, we will cover in an up-depth for you to have actual actionable items for you to take away with you. Some of them will be more like research. Specifically, we're going to talk about using drush patch file to extend drush to handle patch management. For today's purposes, we're going to define that as automatically reapplying your patches that you have downloaded previously whenever you update a module, so that when you run drush up, you can do that without fear that you're going to lose a patch that you've already downloaded. We'll talk about contributing your own patch, even if you think your problem is totally unique to you, which it may very well be, or if the module is abandoned by the maintainer. This is Halp, Drupal 7. Come on in if that's what you were aiming for. For that section, we will assume that you know what version control is, what a patch is, and the general usage of drush, but we will not assume that you have ever submitted a patch to Drupal.org before. We'll talk about simplifying the admin UI by removing platform-dependent variables and disabling unneeded modules. We'll look at a couple of different ways to do that, most notably the settings.php file and continuous integration. But we're not going to go into details about what continuous integration is, continuous delivery, or build automation. ZivTech offers a product called probo.ci. They're a local Philadelphia shop. It offers a hosted continuous integration solution that's aimed at spinning up UAT environments, though not necessarily all the way to production. And there's Jason, I think, is presenting in the 4th session today on that topic. We'll look at behavior testing using bhat to make sure updates don't break basic functionality of your website, but we will not create a comprehensive testing plan. That's kind of beyond the scope. And we won't go into detail about how to install bhat or how to hook it up to your build process. Chris Zietlow will be presenting a deeper dive on bhat in the next session, if that's a topic that you're interested in. We'll also acknowledge the existence of visual regression testing, but we're not going to go over specific platforms for that. There's a talk on that later today as well. We're going to look at monitoring basic site health with Nagios or New Relic, or if necessary, a total kludge, and why you might want to do that. And finally, we're going to talk about using Drupal as a data store for more complex display tasks, also known as headless Drupal, also known as decoupled Drupal. Other than looking at a few simple examples using AngularJS, we're not going to compare Angular to React to other front-end frameworks. Blue Cadet is presenting 2 sessions later today that will address both of this in greater detail. And Jody Hamilton of ZivTech is doing a deep dive specifically on decoupled Drupal right now in this very building. So if your main attraction was to get the decoupled Drupal and you are willing to do it in Drupal 8, go there instead of here. So if you know what all of these things that we just talked about, and sorry for the people who just walked in, you may not get you may not get to choose whether to stay until you've actually been here for a few minutes. If you know what everything that we just said we're going to talk about means, and just knowing of their very existence is enough for you, and you're like, okay, I have those things, I will go act on them, then by all means, go do something else. Because unless you really enjoy terrible nerd puns, you are probably not going to get very much out of this session. On the other hand, if some of these things are new to you, or you're a little bit familiar, but not like totally sure about how you can specifically apply them to Drupal 7 and how that can decrease your maintenance headache, then please sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Starting with Chapter 1, How to Cope with Absentee Module Maintainers, of which I confess I am one. No disrespect to the other maintainers. They provided a very valuable service. They extended Drupal well beyond what the core community could do on its own. They did it as a volunteer in most cases. Some companies, like many of the sponsors we have out here, sponsored those modules so that we could all enjoy them. They deserve all the credit in the world. I'm not trying to trash them for the reality that they may have moved on to Drupal 8 or even off of Drupal altogether to and orphaned their modules. So we're going to figure out how to patch modules ourselves in a manageable way. And that's luckily not very complicated, because no matter what, you're going to be applying a patch, whether it's something somebody else wrote, whether it's something you write yourself. We may as well do it in the most Drupalish way, which is step 1, open a new issue for your problem. Step 2, create and submit the patch. And then step 3, install it like you would install any other patch, because it is just like any other patch if you do it the way we're going to talk about. I'm going to kind of take this a little bit backwards, and I have a scheme to start with the last item first and take you directly to step 3. Treat your patch like any other patch. Really, step 0 would be we would find the patch in, we'd like say, oh, well, I'm going to search in the issue queue for this module to see if anybody else has had the same problem. We'd look at the history. We'd see, oh, there's a patch available. Maybe we'd fire it up in simplytest.me, which if you don't know what simplytest.me is, write that down and Google it. It's a way you can instantly spin up a Drupal 7 site for a couple hours at a time with specific modules or specific patches that you want to just play with. And then we would download the patch and we'd apply it, and great. So if we are not creating the patch, we still have the problem of what to do with the patch in the future. If the module maintainer releases a security update without including that specific patch in that security update, then when you run drush up, your patch is likely to be undone and you have to apply it again. Enter drush patch file, which can be found at that URL right there. And these slides should stay up indefinitely so you can come back and get to that URL whenever you want. Drush patch file basically offers kind of two sides to the coin. First, it adds a new command for drush called patch add. There's a couple others, but we're going to focus on patch add. And it offers a drush makefile called patches.make. Now, if you're already using drush makefiles, then great, you already know how that works. It's totally fine for you. If you're not, you can still do this. You do not have to embrace any other portions of drush makefile in order to make use of this. When you run drush patch add from the command line, you specify either an issue number from the issue queue or and a module that you are that you're patching. That's a common mistake that I make, because I forget to actually include the name of the module that I want to patch. So you start with, it's like drush patch add module name issue number. You can also instead go directly, if you already know which patch you want, you can go directly and list the full URL to the patch. If you specify just the issue number, it'll show you a list of all of the patches that it finds for that issue and says, which one do you want to apply? You pick it, and it goes on. Either way, whichever way you do it, with the issue number or the right to the patch, drush downloads the patch, it applies it for you, and then it writes that patch to your patches.make file. That file then keeps track of all the patches you've applied. In the future, when you run drush up or drush DL, it'll check first to see if you've got a patch there, and it will attempt to rerun the patch again after uploading the module. Yes?
And if you want me to wait till the end, I will. How is this going to be effective with Composer and 8?
The question was, how does this technique apply to using Composer and relate to Drupal 8? It does not relate to Drupal 8 at all. And if you're already using Composer for everything else in Drupal 7, then you can probably do that too. This is not really, that's, yeah. One shortcoming of this technique to be aware of is that if Drush, when it tries to reapply the patch, if it can't, it'll say unable to reapply the patch, and that could be two different things. One could be that it just needs to be re-rolled, that the source code of the module changed sufficiently that the patch just no longer applies, and you're going to need to roll a new patch for it. Or it could mean that the module maintainer has now actually included the patch from that issue, and therefore it can't find anything to patch. So if you get that message, you're going to have to do a little bit more investigation in the issue queue. So now that we've started at the end, we're going to go back to the beginning. This is sadly what the issue queue of one of the modules I maintain looks like, where you can see last updated of open things is actually, pushing a year. So I'm guilty of being one of these absentee module maintainers. Step one is open an issue. It's never the wrong thing to open an issue, no matter what. If you think it only applies to you, and you're right, great. If you're wrong, somebody else might learn something. It's really easy to do, and the second, so the part of this that might be new to some people is assigning the issue to yourself as you create it. And that's actually pretty easy to do, because as you get to the screen where you're creating the issue, there's an assigned dropdown, and it'll either say unassigned, and the only choice in it is your username. So poof, assign it to yourself. You can use the there's a great template that you can use to describe your issue, or you can just say, hey, assign it to me. Now, there's no getting around step 2 of having to fix it ourselves. If nobody else is going to fix it, we're going to have to. We're obviously not going to talk about techniques on how to go fix modules, but if you're new to creating issues, if you're new to contributing patches, you want to look for the version control tab of and that's that little green box on the modules page. That explains in pretty good detail how to create a patch, which I'm going to advise you to do in a sandbox that is outside of your site's regular Git repository if you use Git, unless you're really you're like Bobby Fischer with the Git subrepo kind of system, because it's easy to accidentally kick your puppy by mixing up your repositories. Submitting a patch is basically as simple as commenting on the issue that you opened, and it will when you do that, the Drupal.org is smart enough to identify that, oh, there's a patch. And if you have, I believe it's called the Dredditor extension enabled for Chrome, it even gives you a button that says Simply Test Me that will one-click open Simply Test Me, spin up a brand new Drupal instance, install that module and your patch, and you can test it. Once you have done this, you are now a contributor. You have contributed to open source software. And this is why we did step 3 first. Your patch is now just like every other patch that you would download. Use Drush patch file to add it to your patches.make and say, hey, whenever this module gets updated, please reapply the patch. Even if nobody in the community ever tests it, it's never marked, reviewed and approved by the community, even if the module maintainer never comments, never includes it, that patch will exist for as long as Drupal.org exists, because they have committed to making this, Drupal.org, the lifelong repository for all Drupal code. So as long as the Drupal Association exists, your patch will be available. And if the Drupal Association doesn't exist, we've got bigger problems. Chapter 2, cleaning up your admin UI. Let's play Never Have I Ever. Everybody put your hand up if you wish to participate. You don't have to. And when I say something that you are guilty of, put your hand down. Am I the only one participating? Okay, it'll be boring. My hand will go down right away because I'm guilty of all of these things. Never have I ever accidentally broken stage by pulling the production database down and forgetting to fix a variable that is like points to the API server for stage. Never have I ever broken production by doing basically the same thing in reverse. Okay, never have I ever made a typo while filling out a settings form field, costing myself hours because I could totally swear that it just worked on my local a second ago and now in dev it's broken. It must be the sysadmin's fault. I can see that no hands are still up. Though if any of you were shy and your hand would still be up, now is an excellent time to go pee, and we'll be done with this section in about 3 minutes. For the rest of you, it is not your fault. Admin UI is hard. And when we have thousands of different developers and authors making thousands of different configuration screens for their modules and attaching those pages wherever they think it belongs in the Drupal UI, user experience is obviously going to suffer. People like us, or, well, people like me who use Drupal sites every day for hours at a time, I still will go, oh, I think that thing's under configure. Oh, no, it's under structure. Okay. So if you only use it every once in a while, a couple times a month, it's going to be that much harder for you to find things. A module that deals with content types that offers ticky boxes to select content types might look very similar but do a completely different thing from a different module that has a slightly different interface, or there might be a negation, and all of these things can make a part-time Drupal admin overwhelmed, and that's how they make mistakes. So we're going to try to clean it up a bit. If you've already got a continuous integration environment set up, you can probably just run drush commands from there to set variables at each stage, and that's probably a pretty good solution. If you use views or rules or devel, there are modules that you can turn off in production to reduce the chances of a mistake. Views and rules each have a separate UI module that is used for making changes, and since we don't generally want to make changes in production, though sometimes that can differ, you know, your editors might be empowered to create or edit views on production. Not everything is going to work for everybody. You can use these techniques to disable modules so that people can't stumble across them by accident or confuse, oh, whoops, I thought I was doing that on dev, when in fact I was doing it live. The Habitat module, which was created by ZivTech, who is also still here. I don't know if the original creator is even still here, but that allows you to manage which modules are enabled on dev, stage, and prod. I don't personally have experience with it, but they've got a table a few yards away. Or, if necessary, and this is the example we're going to spend, oops, I forgot to advance my things while I was talking. We're going to talk about using the settings.php file if all else fails. First, we want to identify the problem. Take a look at what variables differ from platform to platform. The devel module has a thing called the variable editor, which is a really great way to do this. I'll point your attention, if you're watching, to this thing called cores domains. That's going to come up a little later, and that's an excellent example of a candidate for something like this. When you're using the settings.php file, something that's built into Drupal 8 that was actually created as an issue for Drupal 7 but never made it into Drupal 7 was this concept of a settings.local file, where you'd have one settings.php file that applied everywhere, and it would say, hey, if a settings.local file exists on this server, include it and do those things too. And that way you could put your database files in a separate file. Right now, you probably have 3 different settings.php files, because assuming that you're a 3-tiered environment, because if you don't, then they all have to share a database, which doesn't make sense. So you either have 3 different settings.php, or you are already doing something like include this environmentally specific thing. Yes, sir?
The settings.local is also a great way to keep the database credentials out of Git.
Yes, that very good point. The point made from the floor was that you don't want your your database credentials in Git, so putting them in settings.php and then, importantly, putting that in your git ignore is a great way to protect those credentials. So basically, this is just an example of you include these 3 lines or something that looks very similar to it at the bottom of your settings.php file, and then in each of your settings, in each of your environments, you have a different settings.local file with configuration variables. So this $conf variable or array is kind of underutilized. Anything you put in $conf becomes a system variable for the platform. So you don't have to make a UI page for your custom module to say what is the API, what is the URL for the API we want to go consume with this module. You can just specify it right in there in $conf, and it just works. Supports nested data structures, the whole shebang. So I hope everybody's back from the bathroom because we're going to move on to chapter 3, which is to say finding problems quickly. On the topic of testings, there are sessions later today by people who know much more than I do on these topics. So I'm going to introduce them and then suggest that you go to those sessions if you want more detailed information. Certainly I will be. The first of those is visual regression testing, which is a way of using math to figure out if anything on a given page has changed from before the update to after the update. This is great on sites that have specific pages that never change, or even just specific CSS elements like hashtag, the div ID content. If you don't expect that to change, or the header, you don't expect that to change, you can target them. This is especially powerful before doing a maintenance update, because when you run drush up to update, I hope everybody, if you're in 7, hopefully you're on 7.58 by now. If not, you need to be real soon.
5.9.
Or 5.9, sorry. Wow, see? There you go. As of...
Yeah, 2 days ago.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
No, thank you. So anyway, point being, thank you all for telling me that I need to go update. I've been too concerned with my slides, obviously. Anyway, updating from 5.8 to 5.9 should not cause anything on the home page to change. Therefore, taking a snapshot before and after and having math tell you if anything changed is powerful. However, most of these frameworks depend on other frameworks like Selenium or WebDriver.io. The WebDriver CSS, which was the very popular way to do this, has now been it's now unsupported. It's not keeping up with current versions of WebDriver.io. So since I'm totally non-expert in this part, I don't set it up myself. I'm going to point you to this excellent resource of a community contributed document that tracks or does its best to track all of the different visual regression packages out there, both ones that you install locally as well as kind of software as a service variety. Next is Behat. A few years ago, test-driven development was the new hotness. Tools like Casper.js, Phantom popped up. You basically write a script to make a bot that goes and clicks around your website and does all sorts of cool things to make sure that things are responding what they were supposed to. Incidentally, if you have New Relic and you've got the pro version for synthetics, they have essentially the same type of thing as part of the synthetics package. It's like the scripted browser, I think is what it's called. Behavior testing tools take it a little bit further. They seek to abstract the bot script JavaScript layer by defining reusable behaviors like look for text or click this link or fill that form. Behat on its own is pretty great because Behat is basically the PHP native Gherkin parser, Gherkin being a language for writing tests. That was, I don't have Gherkin history at my fingertips, but I think it came from the Ruby community. But when you add the Drupal extension to Behat, which is at this URL, it's borderline sorcery. From everything from ease of setup to actual usefulness on your website. Let's take a look at a quick example. If I wanted to write a test in Casper.js to go to the home page, double check that the title of the site is still correct, fill in and then log in as Alice, this is basically what it looks like. And we want to, when we log in as Alice, we want to make sure that Alice gets her welcome message, welcome Alice. So first let me see if highlighting will work. No, okay. So first we specify the URL, we tell Casper to get started, we check for an HTTP status of 200 OK, we then we assert, we're using this test sublibrary of Casper that gives us all those assert calls. That's where, if we don't do any asserts in a Casper call, then it'll happily bot its way through, but it won't tell us if anything went wrong. So we assert that the title of the page is Drupal 7 demo site. We fill in this form, we click it, and then we assert that the text exists on our resulting page, welcome Alice. That same test in Gherkin looks like this. Scenario, I am logging in as Alice. Given I am logged in as Alice and I am on the home page, then I should see the heading Drupal 7 demo site, and I should see the text welcome Alice. Which one of those is easier to read from a non-developer's point of view? And frankly, from a developer's point of view. Obviously this one. They do the exact same thing, but because these keywords at the front, given and then, and there's also one when, Gherkin does not actually differentiate among those, so you can start your steps with any of those, but for human readability purposes, we try to make them make sense. This is something that within about 2 hours, you can easily train your content editors to do themselves, especially where their pain points happen. They say, oh, an update just killed my web form. I want to be alerted every single time. So you say, okay, let's define what are the things that you can tell, how can you tell that this page is broken? It doesn't look broken to me. Yes?
So this one doesn't actually do the logging in. This Gherkin test doesn't have the place where you find the form and put the password in.
So the question from the floor is, does this Gherkin test actually find the form and log in, and does this perform this test as Alice? Those are two different questions. We do not need in Gherkin to specify go find the login form. We just say, we believe that you know how to become logged in as Alice, and because each of these steps is a behavior that has been defined. So you can't just write whatever words you want, but there's a whole list of behaviors, and that's why that whole BDD, behavior-driven development, or behavior testing, is about defining behaviors that you want to be able to script up. You want to be able to describe a user experience in terms of behaviors. And one of the behaviors is, I am logged in as.
And one of the things you can be logged in as is a particular role, and it will create a new user.
Yes. All right, we'll get to that. And this is also not a talk just on Behat, and we're already halfway through our time. So if you had a hint on how to better use Behat, let's save that to the end. Okay. So there are 3 ways that you can, with the Drupal extension, there are 3 kind of levels of awesomeness that you can take advantage of. The first is the black box level. Basically, this means you're going to run Behat on any machine anywhere, and it's going to behave like a bot to go out to any other site anywhere and do the same things that any person could do. That means you can do things like go to a page, you can see I should see the heading, you can define regions so that you can say I should see the heading in the header region. And that will look for the Drupal-specific CSS markup that knows, okay, this region is called header, and therefore it is there. If you diverge from the Drupal standard markup, you can change your Behat definitions to say region is not defined by hash, by this div ID. Region is defined by some other thing that you do. This is the least powerful way, but it works right out of the box. You can test anything with this. And if what your goal is to make sure that your site as a whole has not gone into an error state after an update, this is plenty. You can, in this example, we're visiting the home page and making sure the word error doesn't appear, which is a pretty naive example, but it takes you surprisingly far. In order to create that, or once we've created that, when we run the test, our output will look basically like this. We'll get a list of the number of scenarios that passed, the number of steps that were followed. Each of these green lines is a step. Given I am on the home page is a step that says go to the home page. Then I should see the heading says look for the heading. Any of those could theoretically fail. In this example, they have passed. The most powerful way to implement the Drupal extension of bhat is in, quote, Drupal API mode, which it unlocks a ton of behaviors, such as I am logged in as user this, or I am logged in as a user with role X, or given that I create these 3 pages, let's see what happens when we create pages. The biggest bonus for this is that after it has finished, bhat will clean up after itself. If you have it create users, it removes the users. If you have it create content, it removes the content. So it doesn't leave a bunch of garbage. The biggest drawback to this is that it has to run from the actual server where Drupal is running, because it needs a fully bootstrapped Drupal to do it. There's also an in-between mode that uses drush, so it exposes anything, like if you have all your drush aliases set up so you can talk to different machines and do different things across your network, it makes all of what you could do with those aliases available to you. But since I don't use that mode, so I have no expertise, and I'm sure it'll get talked about in the session later on how to do that. Let's see, where am I? What was that? Okay, so I had an accidental empty slide. Sorry. In addition to making sure that specific updates don't break the site, we also want to make sure that Drupal stays healthy in the long term. We want to know if something goes wrong that we should know about. We're going to start with a module that exposes diagnostic information about Drupal, and we'll poll it using a couple of different methodologies so that we can see the output. Those methods will be, in this example, Nagios, which is a well-supported, big, beefy network and computer health monitoring package. New Relic, which is cloud-based, also very popular. And also, well, we'll figure something out if you don't have access to either of those things. Why do we need to monitor specifically Drupal's health? Isn't a ping test good enough? If we get a 200 OK, isn't that fine? Well, no, because Drupal errors in a lot of ways and still returns a 200 OK. This page has been completely failed to render in this example. I broke it really badly as well as I could, and I still got a 200 OK. Be wary that on the free tier of New Relic, the only thing your synthetics offer are ping tests, and that only checks for 200 OK. So these examples will not work on the free tier, I'm afraid. Yes?
We had, after some changes, we had our server go down a couple of times. Will those modules identify the problem?
If the server itself goes... So, sorry, the question...
The Drupal went down, actually. Yeah. Basically.
No, well, it depends. So the question is, how badly does Drupal have to go down to stop throwing a 200 OK? The answer is pretty badly. If the database goes away, Drupal will still return a 200 OK. If PHP still works, if Apache is still running, you'll get a 200 OK. If Apache has gone down, you won't. You'll get no reply. Okay. But if Apache is running, no matter how broken everything else is, you're almost definitely going to get a 200 OK. Yes, sir?
So a program like Nagios will avoid that from happening. You'll get the straight skinny on what's going on. you'll get the warning that Drupal's having.
So the question is, will a program like Nagios give you the straight skinny? Let's revisit that question in 5 minutes if you haven't gotten the answer. So the way that we're going to expose Drupal health data to the outside world is actually with the Nagios monitoring module. There are a bunch of different modules that will expose health. This one happens to expose the sorts of things I'm interested in, like whether cron has run within a reasonable amount of time. I can set my preferred cron interval. Let's say I'm trying to run it every 20 minutes. If it goes 2 hours without running, I want to know about that because that's a symptom that something has gone wrong. There are ways that you could give yourselves a warning if the devel module has been left off or something. But the Nagios module is pretty good, especially if you already have Nagios. If your network as a whole is using Nagios as its monitoring system, this is great because you don't have to do much. And it comes with this super totally incredibly intuitive uber simple settings page where nobody could ever accidentally click something that they shouldn't. So obviously I'm being sarcastic. The image on the screen is of an incredibly long and detailed UI screen, and it might be a candidate for the sort of UI abstraction that we talked about earlier. Let's watch a little video of setting up hopefully this video will work. Yep, okay, so once we've installed the module, we're going to go to the Nagios monitoring settings screen. We're going to set a unique ID, which is basically the password. It's an API key, essentially, so we don't actually call it my unique string. It's just that way so you'll recognize it when you see it again. A checksum of some kind would be more appropriate here. You need to, we're going to disable the show outdated module theme. We're going to enable the status page. If you don't have Nagios running, or like if you don't have the Nagios package, the big Nagios monitoring thing, this is still useful. That's still fine. We're going to enable the status page so that you can make that work. We're going to enable the unique ID checking. That's what allows us to say, hey, only people with this string can actually see the results. Everybody else doesn't. And then within the, we're just kind of looking at, these are the different things that the Nagios module will report on. They'll tell us if there's a module update that we need to run, if cron hasn't been running regularly. It'll tell us how many anonymous sessions are currently there, how many authenticated sessions, the number of nodes, the number of users, the number of modules. Like you could set something within Nagios, so not in our example, you could set something up to say, like, if the number of modules installed increases by more than 2 over the course of 5 minutes, alert me, because that's a symptom that maybe somebody has broken in and is doing shenanigans. Once we have that set up, it's going to expose a page. And I forget if I have a slide that shows you what the page looks like, but it's really just a very simple string of okay or not okay messages that are vaguely comma separated, but it's not that pretty to look at. On New Relic, we're going to go to your Synthetics tab and select API test. There are plenty, like I said, there's simple browser, scripted browser. You can get as fancy as you want. For this particular purpose, we're going to use API test because it will allow us to grab the result pretty quickly. This is, if you go to the slides, you can copy and paste this. Basically, this is the New Relic Synthetic text that you would put in that. You just change your API key to whatever you created, the path that you set to your Nagios output. That's that status page we talked about. And then all the rest is basically just asserting that we see the string cron OK or admin OK, and if not, then we're going to get an alert. You could also use some kind of JavaScript module to parse the CSV directly, but I'm not going to guarantee that that's going to work, especially with different ways that CSV is a surprisingly fragile format, given its age and venerability. It will look basically like this when you create your synthetic. You just click the validate button, it will run instantly, and then once you've got it to a place where it's returning what you think it should, you click the create monitor button, you set the interval, and you specify which email addresses that you want to send it to. So if you don't have access to a major platform like Nagios or Cacti or something that's already being done on your network by people who are not you, and you don't want to sport for the New Relic Pro account, because I think it starts at like $60 a month or something, then there are some other options. You can, of course, go back to Casper.js and write up a bot that does these same things for you. In fact, they share the same basic underlying HTTP library too. So the Selenium, or the test that's up here, there are plenty of other places where it would run with very few or no changes. You can also use your own cron from some machine that you do control to go pull that yourself. Here is a PHP script. This is also copy and pastable from the slides if you want, where, again, all the things that you would need to change are at the top. All it does is basically fetch that URL, passing in the correct unique key so that doesn't barf, and parse the result looking for bad things. It's not very sophisticated, but it's better than nothing. Especially if you're like me and I have a lot of things running on my cron, and I really don't like it when it gets behind, because then I have content creators saying, how come my thing didn't get published when the schedule said it was going to get published? Oh, cron wasn't running properly. One thing that you can do from beyond that is you can have emails sent to your Slack channel if you use Slack. You go to your particular Slack address /apps, you create an email gateway using this email application. It's the one that looks like that. And setting it up is pretty easy, so we're not really going to go into it. At the end of it, it gives you a specific targetable email address, and you just add that to the list of recipients in whatever alert that you're running, and poof, it pops in there. You pick your channel, or you can have a direct message, just you, or whatever. So, moving on to the last chapter, because we are drastically running out of time, so I'm going to go as fast as I can. Headless Drupal, decoupled Drupal. Anybody who gets this joke, I feel for you, because I also wrote banking software in the late 90s and early 2000s. And this talk is for you. Well, and for other people who don't get this joke, but that's fine. We're going to talk about a couple of major ways that you can expose your Drupal data in machine-readable formats. First is RSS. Second is with an add-on to Views called Views Data Source. Services, which is also powerful and venerable. And if all else fails, for whatever reason, you need to create your own. First up is RSS. The main benefits to RSS are it's already built in to Drupal. It's in both Drupal core and Views, and there are a lot of different parsers that already exist. However, Google no longer provides support for the one that Angular used, which was the Feeds API. It went away about 1.5 years ago, maybe 2 years ago. Yahoo, which had a similar offering under Y Combinator, has also taken that away. So the current available one is rss2json.com. That's the one that has kind of risen to replace it. That one does not particularly care for Drupal's default RSS feeds, and it invalidates it. If you go to the W3C validator, the Drupal default RSS does in fact validate, but it's got like suggestions. So unless you've already got some other thing on your front end, like if you're trying to do this to send Drupal information to some remote front end, unless that remote front end already has its own RSS parser that is downloaded, like there's a bunch of Node.js RSS parsers, and it already works with Drupal, then it's probably not going to be worth it, unless that's something that you're already doing. Option 2 is views data source, which is basically using views. The advantages are the same ones that are advantages for views, and the disadvantages are also the same ones that are for views. So basically, this adds a formatter to the page display type that allows you to format as JSON. And I believe we have an example coming up. If your use case fits very well within views, this is a great choice. So let's take a look at an example. Here we have a demonstration Drupal 7 site, pretty plain vanilla. This is all the demo content. And our goal is to extract the titles and images of the articles to make essentially a Pinterest board using plain HTML plus CSS and AngularJS. Our first step is just to create a view as usual. We use the page display type, not feeds, which is a little confusing. Your first guess will be go to feed, add a new display of type feed, but don't add a new display of type page, assuming that you've used views data source. And then select it as JSON. In the formatter settings, you're probably going to want to leave these first two fields blank, though do it as you wish, but that makes it a very easily iteratable through serialized JSON record when you're dealing with it client side. You'll get something that looks like this. So and that's obviously valid JSON. Now let's take a look at the target. This is actually an iframe. Whoop, not there, it's not. You can see it's an iframe. Hey, all right. So this is actually an iframe, and you can see that basically all of the stuff that's not in the middle was built with HTML with a couple of CSS and JavaScript libraries. This is not a Drupal rendered page. All of the data that is in here at this very moment was pulled from that demo site that we just looked at via the service. If at a more typical desktop resolution, it would look kind of more like that. So let's take a look at how we did that. We looked at the source, which is a view. Now the target is going to be a JS file and an HTML file. The JS file declares an Angular module called demo. We create a controller called photos. We define a target URL, and we fetch it. And then we just send that data back up via the scope variable to the HTML document. Within that HTML document, we include the main Angular script from Google, and we also include, I keep selecting, doesn't really work. So we include the Angular one, and then we include the one that we wrote. And then that enables these ng-app properties that are now meaningful. In the div containing our dynamic content, I've lost my cursor. We point to the demo app as well as the photos controller. We then loop through the records in our indexed array using that ng repeat, and we access the objects that are within. Looks a lot like Twig, honestly. So we're going to leave JSON. We're going to leave the client side behind, and we're going to continue with the server side. with services. Services can expose a URL that could allow, for example, any node on the site to be accessed as JSON. It's pretty easy to use. It's pretty powerful. It supports all CRUD operations, not just retrieve. So you can expose APIs that will let your API partner create content or update it, as well as just simply retrieve it. Honestly, the only thing that's wrong with it is that Drupal 8 is still better. So if you're going to do something super complicated like create three-legged OAuth authentication with your API partner, you may as well do it in Drupal 8 because you're going to get better out-of-the-box performance. If the goal is to simply say, look, we've already created this view, now we want that view, we're going to have a URL that if you click it, you get the JSON of that so that the front-end people can kind of take that one step further, you can't beat services. Here is it took about 1 minute to create a service that will do that. So you add a new service, you give it the machine readable name, you're going to end up selecting REST as your server because you probably haven't added anymore. You'll put in a path to the endpoint so that will be like, in this example, this is going to be /API /API demo /node /nodeid.json. You go to the resources, you enable node just retrieve. You can specify an alias. I just left it as node. And you go back to the server. For simplicity, I'm disabling here everything other than JSON. Now I think in this part, I go to a different, it didn't get captured in the screen cap, but I'm now going to this URL that was not valid 30 seconds ago, but now will give me a JSON result. It's also worth noting that I skipped in this recording assigning session authentication to the server. So if you don't do that, every request will be done as anonymous users, which is fine, because it'll inherit whatever the permissions are for those users. But if you don't tick the box, you'll get a warning frequently that says, hey, you should really choose one of these. All right, we're almost done, I promise. If, for whatever reason, none of that is going to work, you can roll your own. The pros and cons of this are pretty obvious. If you roll your own, it does whatever it is that you need to do, but if you roll it yourself, you gotta build it yourself. So if your use case doesn't fit neatly into one of those other things, like views or services, then hey, we're in Drupal. The whole point is you can do it yourself. That's why we're in Drupal. Here's an example of a module that specifically answers the question, can I please see all of the articles from a given year that are not published anymore? You could do that in views, but I'm choosing here to do it in Entity Field Query to show you basically how it would work. And the key is you take this, it's just so easy. Again, the highlighting. Right here, this is all Drupal JSON output. It's built in already. You can just, and that sets the headers as necessary, and you just go. And when you do that, you get something like that's that exact service that we created before. Here are basically we ended up with 3 nodes. They're all complete. They look exactly like if you turned on Devel and did your node output, or you var dumped the node object. All of it is there in exactly the way you anticipated. Finally, we need to talk about CORS, which is cross-origin resource sharing. This is a mechanism that was recommended by the W3C and has been implemented in every modern browser to enable domains to share some resources. I think it was probably invented for sharing fonts, but in this case, we're going to share APIs with other domains. Essentially, and I'm not an expert in this, if you don't have the right headers and a purely browser-side thing says, okay, I'm on this domain, but I want to include an API from this other domain, the browser will throw an error. If you've only done server-side API work before, you did not know this was a thing, because of course you can do whatever you want server-side. Your server is not going to complain if you say, go get this API. It's going to say, got it. But if your browser says, go get this API, and it says, wait a minute, it's on a different domain name, it's going to complain. If you have ever tried to test your code and it worked fine in your REST client built into your IDE or the Chrome thing, and then you tried to move it into Angular or React and it didn't work, this is probably why. There's a module called cores right there, /project/cores. Lullabot supported the creation of it. And if you're like me and you really don't care to know all the details of how, why, and how, this enables you to continue not caring about that. You just download the module and fill it out. And it looks, your admin screen will, your admin screen looks like that, where you specify the different, key value pairs of, for this particular endpoint, these are the domains that are allowed to access it. For that endpoint, those are the domains that are allowed to access it. And depending on your use case, it might be a great candidate for hiding things from the UI. That's all I've got. Sorry that I took so long. These slides will stay up more or less indefinitely, probably. I assume that there will be a feedback thing posted on the Drupaldelphia site for you to give feedback to me so that I can make the talk less bad. I am ldpm on Twitter and on Drupal.org. Thank you very much, and we have about 3.5 minutes for questions. Questions or hunger? Hunger? Hunger. Really, the answer to any question is going to be there's probably a session that goes into more detail about that this afternoon, so go to that.
Which session is that?
Well, there's a lot. So if you're seriously though, there are multiple sessions on decoupled Drupal. They're probably going to focus on Drupal 8, but the meat of them will probably be about here are all of the different JavaScript services that you can use. Yes.
When I manage patches by hand on a site, I will pull the latest version of the module and install it, commit that, even though it's got none of the patches I have, and say git log that particular directory with module divs, find all the patches that I've added, and just cherry pick them back on top.
That's great. How do you do that when you run drush up and there's 53 module updates all at once?
I go through the modules one at a time.
Okay. You are absolutely welcome to do that.
Well, it makes it nice in that I can say, this is what the module maintainer provided, and these are the patches we're applying on top. So we can do a nice audit of that. Does the drush, drush makefile that you've got, can it do that? Can it apply the base one as a single git commit and then automatically commit each of the patches? Okay,
so the question, if I understand it correctly, is when you use drush makefile or the drush patch file to use the patches.make, will it essentially not fast forward in Git so that you can see in Git every time what the module maintainer did versus what came from drush? The answer is I don't know. That would be something that would be worth investigating, I'm sure.
How often that happens, that if somebody actually keeps like the module, keeps updating and will not add the patches?
Well, especially for Drupal. So the question is, how often does it happen that that the module maintainer is not gonna actually respect the patches that are being contributed to their project? For Drupal 7, it is now extremely common because most of the maintainers have that. It's not like it depends. It also depends on the module. If there's tens of thousands of people who have installed it, then there are probably multiple maintainers, and you've got a pretty good chance. If it's more of a niche case. I think one of the modules I maintain, which is called IMCE private files, has 300 downloads or something, 2 open issues. In my experience, people who are maintaining similarly sized modules may take longer than you wish for them to roll out a new patch or a new version with the patch rolled in. Especially if it's something that doesn't really apply to a lot of different people. All right, thank you, everybody. It's time to go eat.